All right, everyone, it is interview time, and we are here with repeat guest, Dr. Sarah Hill. And Sarah was on Dr. Hill. Should we call you Sarah or Dr. Hill?
Call me Sarah.
All right, Sarah. So Dr. Sarah was also on episode 144. We were talking about this. This is before the pandemic happened. So before all the masks and all the fun things. And the episode, I believe, was called "This Is Your Brain on Birth Control," and I think that's the name of your book as well. And this episode is not about birth control or STIs or pregnancy or any of that. A whole different topic. We're talking about cougars. And I'm so excited because I can't believe we haven't done an episode on cougars before. We're in a podcast network.
We did a couple on pumas
or bobcats. We have some questions about those.
Yeah.
We're in a podcast network called Pleasure Podcast with Sex Talk with My Mom, which is another podcast. And the mom of that podcast identifies as a cougar. And so they do a lot on cougars. And she probably has talked about being a cougar on our show. But right now we're actually going deeper into the idea of what it is, like, why is being a cougar so awesome? Or what does it mean to be a cougar? Or why are younger men or male identified folks attracted to cougars? So before we do all of that, and even though you've been on our show, we'll start with the same prompt. Can you please tell our listeners how you got to where you are today in the field of sexuality?
Yeah. So I really early on was interested in sexual psychology and mating and attraction. And this probably isn't shocking to you all, but a lot of the research that's been done in like trying to understand attraction and relationships and dynamics in relationships has been done from a male perspective.
No way.
Yeah, I know. Shocking. Really? Really? Yeah. And so, I've always been interested in trying to tap into what does this actually look like for women? Like, what are women attracted to? What sort of motivates us in terms of partner attraction, partner choice, and our sexuality? And I was also really interested, I've always been interested in the rules that govern women's sexuality. And we're going to get a little bit into this today, but it's just this idea that, we have so many more rules for what's okay for women. And this is like the reason that a podcast like yours is so fantastic is because it's really breaking down that boundary, right? Because for so long, it's just been completely taboo to even talk about like female sexual pleasure and, all of this. But there's so many rules, and no matter where you go in the world, no matter like where on the globe you land, there's more rules governing women's sexual behavior than men's sexual behavior. And so I was always really interested in trying to understand what are the forces at play with all of that. And then also just trying to understand women's sexual and romantic psychology and understanding the biological underpinnings. And that's what brought me to my book that I wrote, This Is Your Brain on Birth Control, right? But then sort of the other side of this, the relationship side and the mating dynamics and the rules governing women's sexual behavior side of things is what led me to partner with Cougar Life. And begin to try to better understand how do people feel about female-led age gap dating and like have our attitudes about this changed? What does it mean to be a cougar? All of these different types of questions that we're going to be covering today.
I feel like I used to live in Southern California, and I don't know if anyone that living in Southern California feels this way, but I lived in Newport Beach specifically for a while. And I always felt like that was the land of cougars in a very prideful way. No pun intended. I don't know if cougars live in pride. I didn't figure that one out. Or if that's just a lioness area. However, that I had a deep respect for it. I thought it was really cool because I felt like the women that I would see down there cougaring out, which we'll get into what is a cougar in a minute, but they did it with pride. So I like that. And I want to hear your perspective. But before we talk about kind of what other people and what your research shows about Cougarville, also Cougarville.
Cougarville.
Yeah. Let's share with the audience, what is a cougar? Now.
What? I love this. So, generally when we're talking about cougars, we're talking about a woman who is seeking a female-led age gap relationship. So it's a woman who's dating younger than herself. It can be defined in a lot of different ways. So some, like traditionally defined, it's just a female in a female-led age gap relationship. So if the woman's older, then she's a little cougary. But like really, the definition oftentimes is most applied to women who are dating somebody who's about 10 or more years younger than themselves. And so, you know, and I loved, you know, we had talked before the broadcast about like, what is a cougar, and like, is it cougar-y, for example? Is it like a cougar-y behavior if you're a 30-year-old dating a 25-year-old, or you're a 37-year-old dating a 27-year-old? Is that the same thing as like somebody who's a 50-year-old dating a 40-year-old or a 30-year-old? And, you know, and that's like a really interesting question. And it's not something that like has been systematically researched. And I was really thinking about it because I think it would be a really fascinating study if you just asked people, like on a scale of like, you know, 0% to 100%, like what is the cougariness of this behavior, or like how much of a cougar is this woman, you know, to like really like get at like, what is that? Like, what does that mean? And, you know, when we hear people talking about it, sort of, you know, just conversationally, it's generally talking about, I mean, any woman who's there, where there's a significant age gap, but usually 10 or more years younger than themselves.
So they don't have to be a specific age. It's not like they're over 50, then you're a cougar. Okay. So when I was 33,
that's what I was going to ask. So when I was 25, I dated a 21-year-old, and that at that age, that's a pretty big age gap. Actually, it felt pretty significant because we were at different places in our lives. But I wouldn't have called myself a cougar then. So now at 37, if I dated a 27-year-old, am I a cougar? So I just want to know, am I a bobcat or a cougar, or can I be like some other kind of cat? Like what kind of cat?
Jaguar.
Oh, right. Yeah, no, I'm thinking, yeah, like definitely not like just an average house cat, right? You don't you're not like a tabby or like a calico. Oh,
I love tabbies.
Like I'm thinking, yeah, no, I like that. Like, yeah, maybe a bobcat, maybe I like the jaguar or a panther. Panther.
I like a puma.
Do we even know where the term cougar came from?
No, you know, that's like a really fascinating question. I mean, you know, it's this idea that it's this animal of prey, right? That's preying on something that's relatively helpless, right? And so I think that the idea is here you have this older woman who's, you know, preying on this like poor defenseless younger man. And it's pejorative. I mean, it's like not, you know, like that's not like a positive label. And I love that, you know, now we do see that women are sort of wearing that like a badge of honor. And it's like, it's kind of like, you know, in Black communities where they've taken back, you know, the use of some words that have been, you know, used really negatively to describe them. And they're like calling themselves that because they're taking ownership, and it's just like, you know, essentially saying fuck you, you know, this is who I or
like the word slut, like the word that we're doing that with the word slut and slut shaming, and like we can be like, I'm a fucking slut and I love it.
Right, exactly. I mean, it's like taking the negative connotations out of the word, and I think that the word, you know, originated because essentially we're trying to stigmatize the behavior of older women who are dating younger men who are much younger men, and you know, essentially, you know, when it comes down to it, and like what is a cougar, it is when you see an older woman dating a younger man and you don't like it. Right. So then you call her a cougar because that's like, oh, look at that. You know, isn't she a cougar? And, you know, sometimes people will say it in a positive way. And like I said, I love that people who are engaged in female-led age gap dating and even, you know, companies like Cougar Life, which is, you know, is a dating app that focuses on, you know, communities of people who are looking for these types of relationships are taking that back and saying like, this is a point of pride. Like, and again, I don't know if that's a pun. It feels like it should be a pun.
Yeah.
Well, there's also,
research it later.
I think there's also, when I was single for a little while, there's also something to say about certain dudes out there in the dating world that prefer dating older women, let's say, older vulva owners, especially. I'm talking about a lot of this heterosexual folks out there, at least in my experience. And because I remember being, I was at least, I think almost every guy that I had hooked up with, besides the person that I ended up staying with, were all at least 5 to 10 years younger than I was at the time. And I never considered myself a cougar because I had a different definition. I also didn't think it was negative, but I think there is something to be said from the flip side, something to learn from being with an older woman. If you were a penis owner and you're 21, you're like, I want to learn what it's like to have some experience, and experience meaning 10 more years plus with someone. So I think that there's a lot of positivity to hooking up with someone older, especially from the flip side, because typically we think of, an older man and a younger girl in that dynamic. What is that? What's the name for that? Daddy
right.
complex?
Yeah, no. So it's so funny because like we don't have a name for that, right? We just are like, oh no, those are just
silver fox. And that's just an older, attractive man. Yeah.
Right. We just call them men. You know, if there's like an older man dating a much younger woman, we just call that a man. But when a woman does the exact same thing, we attach this like predatory, pejorative label on it. And again, this is like women have been subject to sexual double standards of all kinds. And it's like, it's okay for men to have casual sex. It's not okay for women to have casual sex. It's okay for much older men to date, much younger women. It's not okay for women to do the same thing. And, it's as women, there's so many people who have a vested interest in controlling our sexual behavior, right? Like men have a vested interest in controlling what women do because, God forbid if sex is too pleasurable, we might want to go out and have it with other people, right? And women also have a vested interest in other women's sexual behavior, because if that hot 50-year-old is going to be going after the same partners as me, well, then she's a cougar, and and she's this bad thing and that bad thing, because we don't want her mixing with our partner pool, and so it's like there's so many things, like forces, both men and women alike, trying to box women into like, you can only do these limited range of sexual and dating behaviors. And it's all in self-interest of the people who are giving the negative labels to the older women.
And then also that's where shame comes in. When people feel cornered, or the dating pool thing, you're lessening my dating pool, stick to your own age group, right? That's shaming them for, it can be an open thing. How about it's just about attraction and having fun and consent, of course. Mm-hmm. And I think that, okay, so in terms of when we talk about this female-led age gap relationships, which we talked about a little bit, when male-led age gaps are seen as no big deal, why do you think this is, besides this like this age gap pool of people, but why do you think, can we change that? And why do you think it continues to perpetuate and we shame people for wanting to think outside their proverbial box?
Right. Well, I think that the shame, I think ultimately what that comes from is people trying to control these women's sexual behavior. And again, I think that women, especially like younger women, have a vested interest in keeping hot older women out of their competition, right? Because if all of a sudden hot 50-year-olds are dating 30-year-old men, and you're a 30-year-old woman and you're looking for a 30-year-old man, that's threatening to you. And so I think that, and when you look at who feels and who tends to cast these negative labels on older women who are dating younger men, it's younger women. And in particular, it tends to be younger women who don't have partners. And so we found in our research with Cougar Life that was, when you look at like who has the negative bias toward older women who are dating younger men, it's usually young single women. They're the ones who have the most negativity toward older women dating younger men. And so I think that there's, a little bit of that. And then there's also just this idea that, if I were to ask you, and I will right now, like, what do you think in like a female-led age gap relationship, or like a cougar cub relationship? Like, what do you think that's about? Do you think that's like about romance and love, or do you think that's about sex?
I think it's more about sex.
Right. What do you think?
I think it could be about both. And I hate answering a question like that, but I don't think that we can make an overall assumption about it. I don't know. What do you think? What do you think?
Well, no, what do you know? Yeah. So I love that, and so most people assume, like if I were to ask you, which I just did, like, what would you assume? Like just the first thing that pops into your head, what is this relationship about? Most people assume it's about sex. They just assume that this is a sexual relationship. And, again, there are so many rules out there about women pursuing relationships just simply for sexual gratification. And so I think that part of the stigma against cougars also comes from this, right? It's just like, oh, here's a woman who's who's just going out and engaging in casual sex, right? She's just somebody who's looking for casual sex, and
some young dick.
Yeah, exactly. Here's a woman who's looking for some young dick. But what's interesting, and this gets to the point that that April was making, and not making assumptions and all of that. When you actually look at the the research, so we asked people in this survey that we did, if you've been involved in an age gap relationship, what was sort of the basis of this relationship? Was it about sex? And was it about this? Was it about that? The number one sort of reason that people get together in these cougar relationships, and we were specifically looking at 10 or more years of age difference, it was because of a genuine organic connection between people where they just didn't let age get in the way. And so it's like we have these stereotypes about what it means to be involved in one of these relationships. And I think that the stereotypes are part of what guides the stigma, because and there's always been, and I hate it. And I know that you all hate it. Yeah. And I love that your show is, working against this, but we as a society, and every society tends to punish women for having casual sexual relationships. It's like there's so many rules saying that this is bad, and we call those women names, right? Like we call them sluts and we call them cougars because we're trying to get them not to do it. Right. And we give people negative labels. Psychology research finds that when we stigmatize other people's behaviors, when we're trying to get them to stop doing it, we're essentially trying to get people not to do this. And people are just trying to control older women's sexual behavior by giving them that label, because people do tend to assume that these relationships are about sex only, when the most of the time, right? And this isn't to say that some of the time they're not about sex. I mean, some of these relationships are absolutely, about an older woman seeking, a really rigorous sexual partner, somebody who's, energetic and is going to be able to fulfill them that way. And then the younger men, just like you were talking about, this idea of looking for somebody who's sexually experienced and really comfortable with themselves. So some of the relationships are born out of that, but the result that we found that the most frequent way that these relationships are formed is just based on an organic connection really flies in the face of that stereotype.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you why so many young men want to fuck me, but I think you just answered that. So, what is so appealing about older women and younger men? And then why should women stop second guessing their desirability? You just kind of stated all of that, but do you have any more to add to that?
Well, yeah. So, we asked, and so there's a lot of really fascinating things that came out of this survey that we did. I'm looking at trying to better understand female-led age gap relationships. And, some of the things that came out of it was, one, we found that most men are open to the idea of dating somebody who's 10 or more years older than themselves. So when we asked, and this was a poll that was given to over 1,000 Americans, and it was like a nice sort of representative sample of people living in the US who are adults. And what we found was that when you asked men, would you be open to dating somebody who's 10 or more years older than yourself? And would you be open to dating somebody who's 10 or more years younger than yourself? What we found was that the percentage of men saying yes to both of those was exactly the same. And it was 60% of men.
Interesting.
And yeah, because we always think like men want older women. And as women, we hear this message over and over and over and over. And youthfulness is sexy and, and youth and youth and beauty and youth. And when you look at the survey results, 60% of men are open to the idea of dating somebody 10 or more years younger than themselves. 60% of men are open to dating somebody who's 10 or more years older than themselves. And so it's something that men are a lot more open to than I think women have recognized. And when you look at the reasons that men tend to be most attracted to these relationships, it's because of things that I think that women tend to undervalue in themselves. And that's things like their emotional maturity, which was the number one thing that men found really attractive about older women. And even, their financial stability and their, sort of sexual experience. And those things matter. I think that we've heard so frequently this message about, if you're, sexy is youthful, sexy is, this virginal, nubile, and it's like, no, like sexy is knowing what you want in bed. Sexy is knowing what makes your body work. Sexy is being emotionally mature enough to say, stop touching me there. My clit is here, and this is thing. And these are things that older women are a lot more comfortable talking about than younger women. And I don't know about you all, but I know that even with myself, and I'm in my 40s, I think I'm a much more fuckable version of myself.
Yep.
than I was when I was 30, because I can communicate. And, and I think that that's really, I think that's a lot more important to men than we've really given them credit for.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking about what you were saying, talking about these younger men. And when I was hooking up with the younger men, even though I was in my mid 30s, and one of them was 19. I checked his ID. I wasn't making sure he was above 18 because I was like, oh my God. I thought he was 21, but I was in Chile and you could go to the clubs at 18 there. And I was like, oh my God. I was like,
glad he was 19.
Please tell me that you're really 19. But I gave zero fucks about of course, consent, but I gave zero fucks about speaking to what my desire was with him. I don't know why. It was also, I was feeling much more sexually liberated at the time. So there were many facets of that, but I think there's something fun, and I'm not a mom or anything, but there's daddy issues, there's mommy issues on all levels with people and myself and people that I was hooking up with. Maybe some of them did have mommy issues. I started to see a pattern forming for myself. I was like, wait a second, am I fulfilling? Because I'm like the strong woman that's helping some of their desires with older women. And also I'm in the sex toy industry. I didn't have a podcast at the time, but that's where the podcast stemmed out from.
You would have sex with them and send them sex toys later. But
yeah, I would. I was like, here, this is your experience. Use this with your next partner or partners. And I would give them little gift baskets all over the world because these dudes were from all over. So anyway,
you sound so awesome right now.
It's true. I was
That's so awesome.
One of the guys, real quick side story that I think you'll appreciate, the 19-year-old Chilean. Hi, if you're listening, love you.
Hello.
Loved you, but before. Anyway, I use this bullet vibe, and he'd never been exposed to sex toys before. And he was like, after, I think we hooked up 2 or 3 times while I was down there. And afterward, he's like, can I keep this bullet vibe? I was like, of course. So I was like, I'm going to send you a big gift. He was so excited. And I felt this light, almost like this veil lift from him, like he had been liberated on some level. And I was like, yeah, April, that's cool. Yeah. I did something. Yes, I was like, it's like my social work or something.
That's her gift to the world.
My gift to the world.
There's many of them, but
you can start a philanthropic organization called Vibes
with
Vibes for News.
There's our nonprofit. We've been trying to talk about what kind of nonprofit we would start, so you just figured it out. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I do have a question though. Besides sharing my funny stories that I don't know if I've ever shared that, but now y'all know it's shameless sex here. So what are some tips and tricks? Because people are listening to our show love hearing tips and tricks, but what are some tips and tricks to help fuel women's sexual response at any age?
Yeah, no. So I think that, to start with, I think that women need to understand that they're sexy and desirable across the age span. I had this really fascinating conversation with a journalist, and we were talking about cougars and talking about female-led age gap relationships. And she was, and I was telling her about how this is something that most, and this study focused on heterosexual couples or whatever. And she was a lesbian, but she was like, when we're talking about this, I'm starting to see that older women are a lot more attractive to younger, people than I had thought. And she's like, I'm just now sort of reinterpreting this thing that just happened to me where I was in a bar and this woman who's like 10 years younger was flirting with me, but I kept telling myself she can't possibly be flirting with me. I'm 50 and she's 40. She's not flirting with me. And I think that this is so characteristic of women, right? That we tend to think like, oh, I'm not. I think that we need to recognize that, that sexy comes in all different age groups. And I think that doing that and really getting yourself back in touch with your like inner sex goddess is super important, because so much of women's sexual desire and just like all of that is looped into how sexy they feel. And like when women feel sexy, that's when that turns on and starts their sexual response. And so I think like that's like number one. Number two, get your hormones checked, right? So here's my other little piece of expertise coming in to sort of play here. And that is, if you are somebody who is premenopausal, and even if you're somebody who's postmenopausal, go and get your hormone levels checked. And if you're postmenopausal, you only need to get your testosterone checked. But if you're premenopausal, getting your, keeping an eye on your cycle. Are you regularly cycling? And that will tell you about whether your estrogen and your progesterone are sort of where they should be.
Oh, I have a question about this real quick, just to interject. Yeah. I've heard different things. Is there a specific time you should go in if you're like perimenopausal to get those hormones checked? Is there like a specific time? Because I've heard mixed things, and I have my hormones checked several times and they're always fine, but I feel like they could be out of whack. So is there a time that you suggest that from research?
Yeah. So for women who are thinking that they're going are in the perimenopausal transition, I would there's the day 3 test. So day 3 is when you go and you get FSH and LH, and which are pituitary hormones that signal egg maturation, which produces estrogen. So they usually measure that. One test is on day 3, but then and that's like a follicular phase test, but you want to get 2 tests because you want to do one early in the cycle. Like it's usually day 3, but then you're going to want to do one that's later on. You're going to want to do one in the mid luteal phase. So like day 20, day 18 is usually the day that they do that one. Because you really, the first thing to go when you're going through the perimenopausal transition is progesterone. And that's something you only get in the luteal phase. And so I would do that test first and just make sure. And if your progesterone levels are low, then it could suggest that you may be going into the perimenopausal transition.
And what are the ways that so like for people who have menstrual cycles, or what are we watching for? I think it's our menstrual cycle you're speaking to is the main signifier. Yes. So what are we watching? What kind of shift?
Yeah. If your cycle starts to be irregular, that could indicate that you're starting a perimenopausal transition. And I would talk to a hormone specialist if you're considering hormones. The female sexual response is fueled by estrogen and testosterone. And so if you're not producing enough of those things, it can really fuck with your sex drive. And so if your cycle starts to change, that can mean that your estrogen levels are going to get messed up. And it can also mean that your testosterone levels are going to be messed up. And and so my recommendation is if you start to notice irregularities in your cycle is, and especially if you're having problems with libido and sexual desire, go and talk to somebody who deals with like hormone replacement or hormone therapy, if that's something that you're interested in doing, or even just see your GP and get your hormone levels tested. To see whether or not it looks like you might be heading in that direction. The easiest one to catch is testosterone. Like if your testosterone starts to decrease, that's pretty easy to catch. And that's something that you can even start to address by supplementing with DHEA, right, which is a supplement, and you can buy it in as little increments as 25 milligrams. And research finds that you can safely take it to up to 150 milligrams and have no weird side effects. You're not like going to grow a tail. And the research finds
or
that,
a beard.
Or a beard. And the research
have one of those, damn it.
The research finds that supplementing with that actually increases women's testosterone levels naturally. And it's because you're giving it the building blocks. You're giving your body the building blocks that it needs to produce testosterone. And so you're kind of giving it a footstool. And then most of our bodies will like take the footstool and stand up. And so for a lot of women that will address the issue. For other women, it means having to go on testosterone therapy.
I also learned from experience and my own research, melatonin, if you take melatonin, it actually fucks with the hormone levels in your body and it lowers your testosterone because it is a hormone that your body produces naturally. So if you are supplementing with melatonin, because everyone's like, well, I could get it at Whole Foods or I get it at the natural food store. It's got to be good for me.
Not sponsored by Whole Foods.
No. And I was wondering, my sex drive started to shift. I was taking melatonin every night because it helped me sleep. I had the most bizarre dreams, but I would sleep and then I'm like, I don't have a sex drive. I was like, what's going on? And then one of my friends told me, she's like, you need to maybe lay off the melatonin. April, do you know that fucks with your hormones? I was like, no, really, it's natural. And so anyone out there, if you feel like you're experiencing hormone shifts, that in particular melatonin can affect your testosterone levels and your sex drive. Your libido.
It sure can. And of course, antidepressants, which, half the population is on, those can be very, disadvantageous for a sex drive. Same with birth control pills.
You wrote a whole book on that.
I wrote a whole book on that, and that can really mess up your sex drive. And so check your medicine cabinet. Right. And if you're on one of those two things, then, consider trying a new prescription or, you can try they have different herbal supplements that have been clinically tested, like clinical trials have been done, looking at the effectiveness of them. And some of them are effective. So things like, maca, which is MACA, that's something that seems to be, help a lot of women. DHEA supplementation also, seems to be helpful in terms of, promoting libido, in the face of birth control or antidepressants. But then also, just like get your hormones checked. If your cycle starts acting funny and your desire isn't where it needs to be.
Can I ask just one about that? So if your cycle starts acting funny, not asking funny, is that like, so I used to have a 30-day cycle and now it's 35. Is that funny? Or so that's when it's starting to shift like that, like growing or like, or I skipped a month or lessening.
Yeah.
So any of those shifts,
any of those shifts, I mean, that means something's changing in your body. Right.
Okay.
And it's not ever anything to be alarmed about, unless, and it's still not anything to be alarmed about. But if you're also experiencing symptoms that you don't like, so for example, if you're having vaginal dryness or you're having low sexual desire or some of these other things that, especially as women age, can interfere with their ability to get the sex that they want, then at that point, I would definitely consider going and, getting your hormones tested because, usually, especially for younger women, women who are younger than 50, who are just in this hormonal transition space, taking hormones is something that you can do very safely. And it's something that does sort of restore libido and can improve sexual function.
I have so many questions for you. That's like, because we're on this cougar topic, but still another question about this. Is it ever too late? So like, say, my hormones are changing and right now I'm at 37, but I wait till 45 and then I start doing hormone replacement therapy or something. Is there like a too late point?
No, I mean, look, there's a point at which they don't recommend taking estrogen and progesterone, for example, like in doing hormone therapy that way. But generally, it's after you're fully menopausal. They don't always recommend that. Some doctors will continue with that until a woman is like early 50s. Right. So, but for the most part, if you catch women before like age 50 or so, you can do that safely. There's not like, you need to do it at this like critical window. But I'll say that even for much older women, and when I say much older, I sat next to this woman on the airplane to Santa Barbara the other week, and she was 87 years old, and had just started testosterone therapy.
No.
And she was like, because it was the usual conversation, like, hey, what do you do for a living?
For a living.
Like, oh,
we have those too.
Yeah, I know. And you're like,
I'm an accountant. Hi.
You're like, buckle up. It's so funny because the answer I give depends on like who I'm sitting next to.
Me too.
Right?
Yeah.
Me too. Yeah. I'm like April. I'm like, I work in health.
I work with the IRS. That'll shut them right up.
Exactly. Right. It's like sewage and sanitation.
That's a safe bet.
Yes.
Goodbye.
It's like, all right, I'll be over here.
Oh, good for her.
That's great.
And she just had this new boyfriend that she met, and she was
where'd
like,
she meet him? I have to know.
She met him. Yeah, well, she met him because she's a very successful, wealthy businesswoman, and she met him on a specialty dating website for people who are like multimillionaires.
Oh, damn. All
I
right.
know.
It's not Raya or Raya. No, that's like
more
celebrities
celebrities
and like Insta famous people.
Yeah, like influencers.
Well, that's awesome. I love that woman. Shout out to you if you're listening to this. And that gives us hope for just all people in general. Like, just because you're 87, it does, of all genders, it doesn't mean it all has to be over. Like, you can keep on partying.
Right. You can keep on partying. And she was like, I'm having the best sex of my life.
Yes.
And she's like 87 years old. And I love it. And I think that, for women, owning the fact, like taking ownership of the fact that we are sexy and can have really good sex, and that men, are still interested in us, even after we're 25 years old. I think that that's a really empowering message. And I think that, this research that we did with Cougar Life was really inspiring in a lot of ways, even to me, where it violated some of my assumptions about what, people thought sexy was.
I think one thing, just speaking, I don't know, this won't be the last piece because we need to find out how to work with you and the other
I have one other
offerings.
question too.
Of course. Yes. We're like hammering you with questions.
5-hour podcast.
I just want to point out, like, even if you're in a partnered relationship and you don't consider yourself a cougar, you and your partner are the same, around the same age, or you're a few years apart, you've been together forever, et cetera, you can still do these things for yourself pleasure, the hormone check-in and balance. Because I know that sometimes, even if you have children or you are getting older, or there are different prescription drugs that you're on, I think getting these things regulated for yourself so you feel sexier and you feel more almost liberated. I hate using that term, but you have sexual agency as well, and you feel like the drive to continue dropping in to explore your sexuality, if that's for you, of course. I think that's also important. So it's not like, oh, I'm on the dating scene now and I'm 87. I need to go get my hormones levels checked because I want to be able to bang it out with another 87-year-old or a 78-year-old or a 19-year-old from Chile. You never know. So I think that that's a piece that I just want to share, because once you do those things for yourself as well, it also does open you up to feeling more attractive. It's almost the foundation, the building blocks of creating a sexually empowered space to be in my opinion. And correct me if I'm wrong.
Right. No, I think you're 100% right. And I think that that feeling sexy for women, it makes us feel powerful. And I think that taking ownership of that power at every age is so important in terms of allowing us to feel our best. And you're right, it's not just for women who are like seeking younger partners, but for women who are partnered or women who are unpartnered. Just this idea of really, feeling your most powerful and sexy and taking ownership of that, I think is a really, I think that it is a key, right, to a foundation of our overall wellness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I totally agree. So I'm going to throw out my last couple questions and points that they don't all match all at once. So are you ready for this?
I'm ready. Let's do this.
Okay. So number one is we'll just go bam, bam, bam. Is it true that women or vulva owners who don't have babies actually go into menopause earlier than women who do have babies?
Ooh, good question.
I have not seen research that says that this is the case.
Okay. I've heard people say that, but they're like, fuck.
Yeah. We're like, God damn it. That's good, Amy. Yeah. Good looking out for us.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Okay. All right. Number two, this isn't really a question, but actually, do the studies show that women live longer than men, and therefore wouldn't it make sense to date a cougar in the first place?
No, it's so funny because absolutely. The female lifespan is like significantly longer than male lifespan. So the whole idea that, generally the way that we see relationships go is women dating older men. It's like fucked up unless we just want to be single when we're older.
Yeah. Now I'm going to go date a young one after that.
Exactly. It's like you don't want some old guy sitting around the house watching Fox News.
Damn. All right. Okay. I have one more for you. Okay. So when we talk about cougars, because there are sugar daddies,
sugar mamas
and
too.
Sugar mamas,
and sugar babies.
But those aren't about age, right? Because you can be a sugar daddy. We can be the same age, right? That's not about an age thing. That's just about a money thing. Do you know?
I think that would be like a sugar partner.
Sugar partner, right? So age doesn't really matter. So with cougars, we're talking about age. We don't have a name for the penis-owning individuals that are in that world, but there's the almighty silver fox, but that's just like an attractive older man. But sugar partners are just people who have money that we're dating. We do have fuck boys, but that's not age. That's just a fuck boy.
That's just a fuck boy.
Yeah, that's just a fuck boy. All right, those are all my questions.
Any age.
Yeah, well, so just like one more quick thing to add that we didn't look at in our past survey, but I'm working with Cougar Life right now to do another survey because in one of my conversations I had with somebody, we were really interested in, do we stigmatize female-led age gap dating as much like when we're dealing with non-heterosexual couples as we do heterosexual couples? Because everybody's sort of intuition, and one of the journalists that I spoke with, and again, you know, so she's a lesbian, and she's like, look, in my community, people don't really care, you know? And I'm like, yeah, you know, that's really interesting because my intuition is that the attitudes toward age gaps within in non you know, hetero, non-cis types of relationships are probably not as strict, and that the standards in this and you know, the sort of boxes that we put people into are a lot stronger within the sort of you know, heterosexual, cisgendered, you know, straight world. And so, and it's really interesting
also
question.
Demographically spread? Are we talking about just white people? Are the surveys including people of all different
Americans?
Yeah.
Because
you said Americans, but
yeah, this survey was a nice like a demographic swath of heterosexual Americans. So adult Americans. So, you know, we had a lot of, we had people who were married and unmarried. We had people of all different education levels, all different racial backgrounds that were representative of what we have in the US.
Nice.
Hetero.
Hetero. Yeah. So it's the same because my mom's kind of, hi mom, because she listens to every episode. Hey Janice. Across the board, bisexual ish, or like for the first 6 years of her life, dated men or penis owners. And then did, and she never identified as lesbian, but then I was like, oh, I think I'm bisexual. And she dated someone who's 15 years younger than her. No one would ever have thought anything, like they never thought of it. Oh, this is a huge age gap. You know, it was just like, I mean, it was like they were the kind of the same, to me, they were the same age, and that's how they felt with each other too. So so they just never thought of it. They were like, oh, wow, 15 years. What a big difference.
Yeah. So it's going to be really interesting to get at that. And then like to try to better understand, like, why is it that our rules are so different and, but for different like types of people and different types of relationships. I'm really excited to find out what we learn.
Yeah, I'm excited to find out what you learn as well. Keep us posted on that. And thank you for always, you're such a knowledgeable human. And yes, you're a PhD, but you've written some amazing content for people, a book per se. Are you writing a book on this one? On cougaring?
I'm not writing a cougar book, but who knows? Maybe I will. Maybe I will write a cougar book.
Sounds like you have enough content to do that. Yeah. I would buy it. So can you tell folks out there about your other work that you offer? You mentioned a little bit about the birth control research, plus how they can find you and work with you, any social handles that you have as well, Dr. Sarah Hill.
Thanks. Yeah. So my book that I have out right now is This Is Your Brain on Birth Control. And it's just about the way that the birth control pill can essentially fuck with your mind and change your behavior. And you can find me on all social platforms at Sarah E. Hill, PhD. And that's Sarah with an H. And yeah, that's where I'm at.
And you were on The Principles of Pleasure on Netflix, which I fucking love that entire series. We know a few people that are in our industry that are on that show as well. And everybody that contributed was most excellent. And I was stoked to see you. I was like, oh, Dr. Sarah Hill, we're homies. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
She lives in San Diego. She doesn't live in San Diego. I made that up. I was like, oh, Amy, she lives in San Diego. Amy's like, how do you know where she lives? I was like, I remember from last time she was on our show. And then when you got on, it was like, do you still live in San Diego? You're like, nope, I never did. I was like,
never did.
I made that up somew.
It was a dream.
So
it must have been on that melatonin you took.
I was on way too much melatonin back then.
Hi, I'm melatonin.
Hi, my name's melatonin. All right. Well,
no, that's what I meant.
Oh, okay.
Hi, on melatonin.
Oh, hi. My name's Melatonin. Okay. What's your name? Testosterone. All right.
DHEA.
Sarah, we love having you. Also, one thing that I like to take back is the see you next Tuesday, because I don't believe cunt should be received as a bad word anymore. But people get really triggered by it. But when we said see you next Tuesday from the beginning, that's what we were like, it's see you next Tuesday, because we launch an episode every Tuesday. So I hope no one out there is offended by our see you next Tuesday.
Was that an accident or do we mean to do
No,
that?
I meant it.
Did we choose Tuesdays for that reason?
It's an acronym. Yes.
Oh,
I was like, let's do see you next Tuesday.
So long ago. We're so old.
Even
now.
though you spell C with an SEE, but it's still C. It made sense at the time. But anyway, not the point. The point is for everyone out there that loves Shameless Sex and loves hearing guests like the amazing Dr. Sarah Hill, please rate us. iTunes, Spotify, 5 stars. We read every single review. It only helps people find our podcast faster, easier. It's a free resource for everyone out there in the world to absorb. So thank you for tuning in whenever you are. If it's Tuesday, Wednesday, which is hump day. So we could have dropped on a hump day, but there's no acronym for that yet. Anyway, love you all. And anything else I should add, Amy?
I think you say ciao for now.
I think you say.
Wait, what? Is that what you say? Do you want to say it or want me to say it?
You can say it.
Okay, I'll say it. Ciao for now.
And join the Shameless Sex revolution. Bye.